Donald Trump himself keeps saying it was a day of love.
There's no question there was a whitewashing of January 6th.
January 6th was an atrocity. World War II, things that happened, like the Holocaust, chattel slavery.
Telling people that the economy was great and the migrant crisis wasn't real and their cities were safe. Those were mistakes. However, he never encouraged his supporters to go and break the law.
You tweeted, "This is a coup attempt." Do you think that history will remember this the way it actually?
The tape shows very clearly Brian Sicknick walking through the building in apparent health after the media told us for 2 years that he had been murdered.
Sounds like what you're telling me right now is that you didn't only think that you were going to die, you thought you were going to be raped.
Yeah, I thought I was.
You can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
January 6, 2025, Kamala Harris is officially a loser.
The whole number of the electors appointed to vote for President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, the majority is 270. The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris. Kamala D. Harris of the state of California has received 226 votes.
So Trump got Florida's electoral votes, Kamala Harris got California's, but it took Florida like 5 hours to get their results, and it took California 1 month. Not the flex that you think it is. But poor Kamala Harris, this is officially the last time anyone will refer to her as Madam President. The Vice President's President Pro Tem of the Senate. Nice little smirk from Speaker Mike Johnson in the back there. But Democrats are patting themselves on the backs for accepting the defeat and certifying the Electoral College results. On January 6, 2025, the 4-year anniversary of January 6, 2021, the Jan 6, Democrats are very upset that people did not buy the Jan 6 hoax. And it did not stop Donald Trump from being able to take office. Even Anderson Cooper suspects that history will not be kind to the January 6 setup.
Well, that's how we remember the day now. The question is, will history remember it that way 4 or 40 years from now? Congressman Kinzinger, you were in the House. You actually tweeted at 4:30 p.m. 4 years ago on this day. You tweeted, "This is a coup attempt." Do you think that history will remember this the way it actually happened?
Yeah, I do. Look, we're in this emotion. Donald Trump got defeated. He convinced. He convinced his base that election was stolen from him, and that for 4 years built this intense anger where they truly believed this deep state, garbage was happening. He's going to be president now for 4 years. He's going to own everything that happens in the economy, everything that happens in the world. And that excitement that we've been robbed will wear off. And history has this amazing ability to accurately reflect the happenings of that day. And so while maybe today it's kind of surreal that we're here 4 years later after that and putting Donald Trump back in the presidency, history will not be kind to him.
So Adam Kinzinger, who was on the fraudulent January 6th committee, delusionally doubles down, hoping that no one will dig up this clip in a year or in 10 years, whenever we finally get to see the full details on that sketchy day in 2021. CNN also tried to make sense of why American voters were not persuaded by the intelligence community's entrapment scheme. I mean, violent, almost insurrection in which we almost got this guy as our new supreme leader.
Liza, do you think, though, that the right-wing sort of media landscape also played a big role in this? Because over time, you started seeing people say it wasn't that violent. Donald Trump himself keeps saying it was a day of love.
There's no question there was a whitewashing of January 6th, but I kind of put the onus on elected Republicans. You just played those clips. We all saw it the same way on January 7th. That's just a reality. The party was ready to move on. But that changed because the public slowly started to say, you know what, we liked the Trump days, the Republican public, I should say. And there was this feeling of sort of nostalgia for when he was in office. There was a media ecosystem that I think boosted it, and I think did share some myths and untruths about the events of that day. But I want to say one thing interesting because I was left in December, but was around January 6th. And many of us were arguing when Pence was getting this pressure campaign to not certify the election. What if Kamala Harris in 4 years didn't certify the election? The X factor, Kamala Harris, like Mike Pence and Al Gore before her, is going to do her constitutional duty and certify the election.
Yeah, Joe Biden made a lot of mistakes. Messaging was one, telling people that the economy was great and the migrant crisis wasn't real and their cities were safe. Those were mistakes. However, there's one thing he didn't do. He never encouraged his supporters to go and march on the Capitol, to go and break the system, to go and break the law.
So they basically say that groceries were so expensive that Americans stopped caring about democracy. Haha. Rather than admit that the public sees through their scam, the media has obviously colluded with the three-letter agencies to push the latter's multitude of hoaxes and scams for years now. Rather than admit that people have stopped buying their scams, CNN berates Americans for being irresponsible and anti-American and anti-democracy. Whatever, CNN, enjoy your further descent into ratings hell. By the way, this is the first presidential election loss that the Democrat Party has not contested since 1988. That is almost 40 years ago. Yeah, this is the party that respects election results.
You can run the best campaign. You can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
How can you win with Russian interference, though?
That's a real thing.
That's what I'm scared about in 2020.
But rightly.
Because I think he's an illegitimate president that didn't really win. So how do you fight against that in 2020?
You are absolutely right.
He's an illegitimate president in my mind.
Would you be my vice presidential candidate? Folks, look, I absolutely agree.
Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered.
Trump knows he's an illegitimate president.
The president-elect, although legally elected, is not legitimate.
I don't see this president-elect as a legitimate president.
I have an objection.
I object to the 15 votes from the state of North Carolina. I object because people are horrified.
He's an illegitimate president.
Our election was hijacked. There is no question. Congress has a duty to hashtag protect our democracy and hashtag follow the facts.
And if you're at all curious as to why so many Americans do not seem to believe that January 6, 2021 represented an actual attempt to overthrow the government, by the way, by the part of the population that's obsessed with the Second Amendment, yet we're unarmed. So if you're wondering why people don't seem to buy it, maybe it's because the leader of the insurrection said this on the day of the insurrection.
I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you, but go home and go home in peace.
The leader of the insurrection is telling people to go home and don't play into their hands. No wonder they kicked him off all social media, banned him from every social media platform, and banned this video from being aired back in 2021. And our favorite unhinged ladies of daytime television, Sunny Hostin, Whoopi Goldberg on The View, made waves today by shocking everyone left, right, and center with this truly genius, nuanced take on January 6th.
I think we need to find moral clarity, in this country. And I just remember after January 6th, you had someone like Mitch McConnell placing the blame on January 6th where it belonged, squarely on Donald Trump's shoulders. And then you started seeing people backtrack that and losing their moral center. You had Condoleezza Rice, I believe, on this very show saying, we need to move on from January 6th. I say no. You don't move on, because January 6th was an atrocity. It was one of the worst moments in American history. And when you think about the worst moments in American history, like World War II, things that happened, like the Holocaust, chattel slavery, we need to never forget, because past becomes prologue if you forget any race.
And there it is, ladies and gents. In case you didn't know, Jan 6, 2021 was basically the Holocaust. It was totally the same thing. It was basically the transatlantic slave trade, which upended millions of people and brought them from one continent to like 3 other continents. It's basically the same thing. In case you didn't know, 6 6 million Capitol police officers were imprisoned in labor camps and systematically murdered on January 6, 2021. Oh wait, no, I'm getting that it was less than 6 million officers who died on January 6. Oops. Oh no, this just in. It was 0 officers who died on January 6. But I thought a guy was beat to death with a fire hydrant.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the hours-long attack.
They beat a Capitol police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, she actually did something I think very helpful today. She put the spotlight back on something that I think hasn't received nearly enough attention. She said, quote, "The violent mob bludgeoned to death a Capitol police officer. They defaced symbols of our freedom. These terrorists roamed the Capitol, hunting the vice president and the Speaker of the House."
So Officer Brian Sicknick was bludgeoned to death. A Capitol police officer was bludgeoned to death by a fire. Did I say fire hydrant before? But I thought a guy was beat to death with a fire hydrant by a fire extinguisher. Fire hydrant, that might be kind of difficult to get out of the ground. Wait, you mean to tell me they lied?
Consider the death of police officer Brian Sicknick. After reviewing the previously withheld video evidence, we can tell you with certainty that Officer Sicknick was not beaten to death by Trump voters at the Capitol. The tape shows very clearly Brian Sicknick walking through the building in apparent health after the media told us for 2 years that he had been murdered. So they were wrong about that. Okay, they got caught. Here's the interesting thing. They won't admit it. Liz Cheney's tweet is still on Twitter tonight. Officer Sicknick was killed defending our Capitol from the violent mob on January 6th. No correction. Anderson Cooper of CNN still has not apologized. Quote, "Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight," he told us. Those are lies. So why not just admit it and move on? But they won't. In fact, this week, the White House trotted out both the press secretary and Joe Biden's attorney general, the Attorney General of the United States, to claim not just that Brian Sicknick was actually murdered by Republicans at the Capitol, but that other officers were murdered too. It's almost beyond belief.
The rage of bipartisan lawmakers, you heard them all yesterday. You guys reported on it, who have condemned this false depiction of the unprecedented violent attack on our Constitution and the rule of law, which cost police officers their lives.
It was a violent attack on a fundamental tenet of American democracy, that power is peacefully transferred from one administration to another. 5 officers died.
5 officers died on that day. Now, that's just not some guy on Twitter. That's the Attorney General of the United States. Joe Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, is a liar. He just lied about something that is provably false. Killed that day. Notice he didn't tell you. No one ever tells you. No one ever shows you their autopsies. They don't want any detail. They just want the slogan. Now, they're counting Brian Sicknick. That's a lie. But who are the other 4? Well, those are 4 officers who themselves after January 6th, in some cases long after January 6th. But they're we know for a fact were the result of the Republican mob at the Capitol. It's just false. And it's not some esoteric fact. That fact is available to anyone who has internet access. No police officers died that day on January 6th. None. Not one.
But hey, if no police officers died on January 6th, no one was bludgeoned to death with a fire extinguisher, then why are people like Amy Klobuchar, Chuck Schumer, Attorney General Merrick Garland, and even people on CNN still today saying that they were? Here's Amy Klobuchar. 4 years ago, the electoral vote certification was interrupted by a violent mob. Police officers were injured and killed. Not true. Tweeted this out today. Richard Grenell, who served in the first Trump administration, will be serving in the second, pointed out that on CNN, they just said multiple officers lost their lives on January 6th. Not true. Not a single one lost their life. Why would they say that? Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, put out a press release claiming 5 officers died in the line of duty as a result of January 6th. And this user makes a good point. How many J6 defendants were charged with manslaughter or murder? 0. You know why? Because it wouldn't hold up in a courtroom. Yet Chuck Schumer wants you to believe that multiple officers died.
We remember all of those who were hurt, even lost their lives as a result of what happened on January 6th, 24 years ago. 2021.
We remember all those who were hurt or lost their lives. When has the media ever mentioned that the only 4 people who died on January 6th were Trump supporters? 2 older men died from heart failure. This is unfortunately a relatively common occurrence for people over the age of 50 or 60 when they're in crowds and stressful situations, which is what happened. 1 person was relatively young and died by accidentally overdosing on Adderall, some kind of ADHD drug. Sounds like Adderall is amphetamines. And the last person was Ashley Babbitt. She was a veteran, and shame on the officer who shot her.
Over 3 million people here today. So despite what the media tells you, boots on ground definitely say something different. There is a sea of nothing but red, white, and blue, and patriots and Trump. And it was amazing. We could see the president talk. We are now walking down the inaugural path to the Capitol building. 3 million plus people. God bless America, patriots.
But for some reason, all of these people keep saying that officers died on January 6th. Why do you think they're saying that? So the first casualty was January 7th. It was Brian Sicknick, Capitol Police officer. He suffered 2 strokes. According to the chief medical examiner in DC, he died of natural causes. 2 additional Capitol Police officers died 3 days after January 6th of self-inflicted wounds. They both committed. And then 6 months later, in the summer of 2021, 2 Metropolitan Police officers also committed suicide. One of those guys wasn't even there on January 6th during the riot. He showed up hours later to enforce the curfew after everyone had left. However, that didn't stop Jen Psaki from pinning his on January 6th. If their deaths were considered a result of activities in the line of duty, then their widows would be permitted to get 100% annuity on their deceased husband's salary. So there were actual practical reasons for trying to connect their sides to January 6th, namely to not leave their widows in a lurch financially. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, otherwise known as AOC, actually accused the Trump-supporting DC protesters in 2021 of trying to rape her.
I didn't think that I was just going to be killed. I thought other things were going to happen to me as well.
So what sounds like what you're telling me right now is that you didn't only think that you were going to die, you thought you were going to be raped.
Yeah, I thought I was.
And that you now understand, having thought about it, is because of your experience.
Yeah, I think so.
Now, one of the reasons why it makes no sense for AOC to accuse the Jan 6 protesters of wanting to her is that she wasn't even there. She wasn't even in the Capitol. So even if there was some nefarious individual with bad intentions, he would have had to have left the Capitol where they were certifying the Electoral College results. This is the whole point of the protest, by the way. And he would have had to have traveled to Cannon House office building almost a quarter mile away just to search for AOC herself individually. Persecution complex much? She interestingly came for her boss, Nancy Pelosi, taking issue with the lack of National Guard troops.
You know, the other fear in this situation too is where was the National Guard? And at the time, you know, now we know more stories about this, but at the time, National Guard wasn't called. And I was starting to get just this feeling in my gut that, like, in any other situation like this, they would be called, they would be here. And they're not coming. And we didn't know if they were being held off or what, but in the event that the National Guard didn't come, it was just a matter of time before the building got breached. And
yeah, it's almost like they weren't called on purpose. It's almost like someone kept them away. Did I say she came for her boss, Nancy Pelosi? Just kidding. She implies that it was Trump, even though we now know a Pentagon official recently admitted that National Guard troops were purposefully, intentionally kept away from the Capitol. Do you think AOC has ever asked her why?
This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
There's not a question of how they had, they don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
Now, technically, even though Nancy Pelosi claimed falsely that Trump did not request increased National Guard troops at the Capitol that day, it has now come out that the DoD Inspector General at the time intentionally delayed the deployment of DC National Guard troops to the Capitol on January 6, 2021. So that's now proven. That's now a fact. It was Trump who said, hey, look at this. There's going to be a large amount of protesters here on the 6th. Make sure that you have sufficient National Guard or soldiers to make sure it's a safe event. He furthermore said, hey, I don't care if you use Guard soldiers, active duty soldiers, do whatever you have to do to make sure it's safe. This House investigation goes on to show that the DoD Inspector General actually turned down the president's request for National Guard troops out of concern for optics. Poor little AOC and her office would have felt much more secure had there been National Guard troops there. Obviously, if there were enough troops that day at the Capitol to contain the violence, to contain the chaos, much of which was organized by undercover federal operatives, that's a whole other story. Had there been sufficient National Guard troops there to contain some of that chaos, to not allow it to erupt, then Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Adam Schiff, Adam Kinzinger, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris would not have been able to use that day to stop their chief political rival. Here's Trump stating the obvious, that the people who actually stood to gain from January 6th had a hand in allowing it to happen.
Because I think it was an insurrection caused by Nancy Pelosi. This was an insurrection, if it was an insurrection, which there were no guns, there were no anything except for the fact that they shot Ashley Babbitt. Somebody from police force shot Ashley Babbitt. So unnecessary, so sad.
So Nancy Pelosi wants everyone to believe that January 6th was worse than 9/11, Pearl Harbor, the US Civil War, and the Holocaust combined. But she can't even convince her own daughter. Here's her daughter, and by the way, documentarian, who just happened to be invited to the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. Here's her daughter saying that January 6th was not a real insurrection.
You have politicians every night comparing it to Pearl Harbor, 9/11. That was just DC. And DC, they're under siege at the National Guard for 7 months.
Well, the reason, I think time is going to remember it differently. Right now, people are still, there's two things. Media needs stuff to fill. I mean, if you watch TV on January 6th, it was like January 6th, 24/7. If there was an insurrection, you were supposed to be in line marching. You're in the military, you know this.
No, that's
you were supposed to have a plan.
Exactly. It's called operation order. You sit down overnight with your soldiers. You go over. All right, you're gonna go here. You're gonna go in by this side. At this time, we're gonna take over this. There's none of that.
If it was an insurrection, it's the sorriest insurrection in the 20th, 21st century ever. No guns, no plan. People taking selfies.
A guy smoking pot.
I love the guy.
Yeah, I'm like.
Well, we did that. We just went to New Hampshire last week for the guy that just was drinking beer.
My favorite,
he just walked in with the Trump flag in the Senate.
That's it.
That's it. And he got. So I don't know if it was good or bad. See, but you didn't walk into the Senate. See, walking into the Senate.
But I didn't do that.
I know, that's what I'm saying. That's the bad thing.
I think they might have used him to shore up their 1512 charge, too.
She goes on to talk about Gavin McInnes, one of the Proud Boys organizers, says that he was one of her best friends, that he's a Brooklyn hipster, and that maybe he tries to rile people up or trigger people. Like he's sort of incendiary sometimes, but he has nothing to do with white supremacy. That's something that her mom and other people, of course, perpetrated for the last 8 years. By the way, it was confirmed that the FBI had at least 26 confidential human sources at the Capitol on January 6th. As JD Vance points out in this retweet, yes, for those keeping score at home, this was labeled a dangerous conspiracy theory only months ago. So yeah, the government's own indictments prove that federal informants were organizers and participants going into the restricted area, potentially involved in some of the violent activities on January 6, 2021 at the Capitol. And the suppressed security footage shows mostly peaceful and unarmed crowds staying confined to the tourist ropes. This prompted an epic tweet from Norm Macdonald at the time, rest in peace. He said, "I love when the violent terrorists made sure to respect the velvet ropes in Statuary Hall." Of course, Norm Macdonald and Trump supporters are conveniently leaving out this attack on the White House from 2020. As a result of this violence, the president and his family had to hide out in a bunker and be removed from the White House. Man, these MAGA supporters just have no self-control. Oh wait, this was Black Lives Matter and Democrat voters, i.e. communists, who openly call for the overthrow of the government. So if these people voted for Republicans instead of Democrats, I wonder how the news media would have reported on these incidents from the summer of 2020. Maybe that's a part of the reason why so many Americans, many of whom don't even necessarily like Trump, do not buy the official narrative about January 6th, because violence like this was commonplace for 6 months before January 6th. Of course, the House Committee on January 6th was looking into what happened that day, or allegedly telling people that they're looking into what happened that day, but they, for some mysterious reason, decided never to invite the chief of Capitol Police to testify. I wonder why.
Ask yourself why the January 6th committee never requested that I come and publicly testify. Think about that. I'm the chief of the Capitol Police. To have me come down and publicly testify for the January 6th committee, because I think they were concerned. It would begin to show what went on the 6th, what went on the days leading up to the 6th, and what was the involvement of political leadership and their appointees. Wow.
But this is all besides the fact that the Democrat Party has notoriously worked with former domestic terrorists in the past. This is Susan Rosenberg, who had a hand in actually blowing up the Capitol, partially blowing up the Capitol in 1983. She had her sentence commuted by Bill Clinton, and she currently works for a social justice nonprofit that has contributed to funding Black Lives Matter. Barack Obama had infamously associated with Bill Ayers. Both Ayers and Rosenberg were associated with terrorist offshoots of the Weather Underground in the 1970s. These were groups run by disgruntled but fairly wealthy leftist youth who had explicitly called for the overthrow of the US government, but had no serious plans to actually follow through, apart from mostly isolated incidents of domestic terrorism. Now, these leftist groups in the 70s were not actually going to overthrow the government, and federal operatives in the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys or Nick Fuentes outfit, they're also not trying to overthrow the government. Unfortunately, the people at January 6th who knew what they were doing and who had ulterior motives were simply participating in a big charade to keep Trump out of office. The people who did not know that they were a part of that were being used, or in Trump's words, playing into the hands of people trying to use them. But the good news is that it mostly didn't work, and it didn't keep Trump out of office. So maybe we should finally let it go. And maybe we should prosecute the people who set all this up for treason. Sadly, the intelligence community has been involved in manufacturing events like this for so long that there would be far too many people to prosecute. It's probably just going to be let bygones be bygones, and hopefully we can get some kind of big reveal at some point. Though I would love for all of these secrets to be revealed one day, for the people who are a part of it to be prosecuted, I will just settle for commuting the sentences of people who weren't violent on that day, because I think it sets a very dangerous and concerning precedent when US citizens are being imprisoned by their government for their political speech. Anyway, if you got this far into my video, thank you so much. You know who you are, and I'll catch you on the next one.